Hi everyone, this is Sam with the Wine News in 5. As you can see, I am not at home this week. I don't have my stand or my lights, so apologies for the lighting and any jostling. I'm in Napa reviewing 2022 Cabernet Sauvignons and 2023 Sauvignon Blancs, which will be up on our site soonish. Somehow, it is already the end of April, which means that, drumroll please, we've launched our 2025 wine writing competition. It also means that port houses are beginning to declare their 2023 vintage, and Bordeaux is beginning its 2024 en premier campaign. On a more depressing note, the Pesticide Action Network Europe, Pan Europe, released a report this week on a significant increase of trifluoroacetic acid, TFA, which is a forever chemical in European wine over the last 3 decades. But starting on good news, our wine writing competition. The theme this year is an ode to a grape variety, and we are accepting essays, fiction, and nonfiction stories, and poems. You can find all the details on our site. Submissions are due no later than June 23rd. As an aside, this competition is very near and dear to my heart. In 2019, I was shortlisted. That same year, I wrote my first harvest journal for the site. I feel I owe a lot to this competition. And I now have the great privilege of helping to judge alongside the rest of our full-time team, as well as Julian Lady, who manages everything competition related, Hermione Ireland from the Académie du Vin Library, and a guest judge who is yet to be announced. On to 2023 port declarations. As you are likely aware, vintage port is not produced every year. It is produced only in the best vintages, but not every port producer agrees on what constitutes the best vintage. So what happens is that about 14 to 16 months following a vintage, port producers taste their wines and they decide whether or not they think that the quality was uniformly good enough across all of their properties to make a vintage port. If they believe it was, they submit their wines to the IVDP, the Instituto dos Vinos do Douro e do Porto, to see if it meets the Institute's standards. If approved, they declare that vintage to the public. If they don't wish to declare a vintage, they look at the quality of each of their single properties, which would otherwise have gone into their vintage blend. And they may choose to submit single quinta vintage ports to the IVDP from their best performing properties. Roughly speaking, for ruby ports, the quality hierarchy from top to bottom goes vintage port, then single quinta vintage port, then LBV or late bottled vintage or crusted, then ruby reserve, then entry level ruby. Thus far for 2023, no house has declared a full-fledged vintage. Churchill has declared Quinta da Gricha, Ramos Pinto has declared Quinta do Bom Retiro, and Taylor's has declared their multi-property blend from the subregion of Feitoria that they launched last year. It's called Sentinels. Symington's brands have declared single quintas, with Coburn's declaring Quinta dos Canai, Dow's declaring Quinta do Bonfim, and Quinta da Senhora de Ribeira, Graham's declaring Quinta dos Malvedos, Ware's declaring Quinta da Cavadina, and Quinta del Vesuvio declaring their standard bottling. If you're curious, the Port Forum does an excellent job of tracking what has been announced. After announcements have finished around September, the Port Wine Brotherhood and the IVDP will combine their data and they'll decide whether enough producers declared that the vintage can be considered a classic vintage year. Next, 2024 Bordeaux en premier. Last week, Bordeaux hosted 2024 en premier tastings. What that means is that members of the trade and media were in Bordeaux tasting barrel samples of the yet-to-be-released 2024 vintage from the most prestigious Bordeaux estates. While these wines won't be bottled for another year, a proportion will be offered for sale in the coming weeks. Importers and distributors will prepay for the wines that they want in order to secure them at potentially lower prices than when the bottled wines are released. They will then offer them to their retail buyers. Historically, this arrangement was meant to secure early revenue for the producer and to allow consumers to get a better deal on sought-after wines. But In recent years, prices have climbed so high that demand for en primeur wines has faltered, and wines on the market often sell for less than their en primeur prices, which has caused a lot of experts to call on producers to slash prices for the 2024 vintage. So, if you're curious about getting your hands on sought after Bordeaux and you're considering buying en primeur, especially in the current market, it's a very good idea to have the maximum amount of information possible. Starting on Monday, James Lawler MW will be releasing his tasting notes and scores on the 2024 vintage. His overview of this very challenging vintage was published today. Meanwhile, on our members forum, Nick Martin, who founded Wine Owners, is updating our members on en primeur release prices and how both prices and scores stack up against previous vintages. Thus far, only a handful of chateaux, including Bataille, Pontet-Canet, Braner du Cru, Latour Pomerol, and La Fleur Petrus, have released pricing. All have reduced their prices relative to last year, but thus far, none has dropped prices significantly enough to make the wine seem like a great value. Finally, the Pesticide Action Network Europe's latest report. On April 23rd, Pan Europe released a report on the rapid rise of TFA contamination across the EU. TFA, or trifluoroacetic acid, is a so-called forever chemical that cannot be broken down by natural processes and accumulates in water, soil, and plants, and is suspected to affect reproductive health. TFA has been proven to be a breakdown product of certain pesticides, and Pan Europe's latest report specifically looks at contamination in wine, with testing carried out across 10 European wine-producing countries. In samples of wine made prior to 1988, there is no detectable TFA. From 2021 to 2024, wines showed average levels of 122 micrograms per liter, with some peaks of over 300 micrograms per liter. And there have been a lot of headlines around this news, but it's important to remember that this study was looking at wine rather than, say, olives purely, and I quote, for a specific reason. For no other agricultural product are the harvests from past decades so readily available and well preserved. It's likely that TFA has increased in nearly every agricultural product over the last few decades. So, however you assess the evidence about TFA and human health, it is not a reason to demonize wine. That's all for this episode of the Wine News. If you enjoy this newscast and you'd like to see it continue, please subscribe to jancesrobinson.com and give this post a like. And if you have breaking news in your area, please email me at news@jancesrobinson.com. Thanks.